And we've been talking about the rumors or the hearsay that a lot of publishers, including DC and Marvel, are not paying their artists, their creators right now. Recently, there was a thread. It was about 2 weeks ago from Will Robson. I went out there. I decided to check it out. There's a lot of stuff going on here, and a lot of people are finally breaking their silence and speaking up about getting screwed over on payments in the comic book industry. This thread is absolutely enormous. There are so many quote tweets and responses to it. I will not be able to cover all of it. It would literally take me probably 2 or 3 hours to cover everything of significance contained in that thread. It's not raining money right now. There's a lot of people getting screwed over during the holiday season, and apparently they've had it up. They're no longer scared of losing their jobs. Perhaps they're ready to just move on. Perhaps they said, you know what? Marvel, DC, Image, IDW, Valiant, they all owe me so much money, I'm never going to get it back anyway. Why wouldn't I shine a light on people screwing me over out of the money I earn for the work that I've already completed? I'm going to go over the first set of tweets from Will Robson and then some of the responses to it from better known creators that I thought were very interesting. He opens up asking, has it become industry standard to pay creators ridiculously late for their work? I've struggled all year with all the large companies I work for to get paid on the agreed time. I'm talking months late. It's sad how nervous I am to even talk about this publicly in fear of being blacklisted for future work, but I've heard so many horror stories from other freelance creators recently about fighting for their paycheck, and I need to vet this all out and hopefully raise some awareness to make some serious change. And he says, all the major publishers I work for. If you go into Twitter and look up Will Robson, and you look at his profile, it says he works for IDW, Marvel, DC, and I believe Image Comics. It's not just an Aftershocks Comics problem. It's not just an Action Lab problem. It's not just a Valiant Comics problem. This is a plague all across the comic book industry, including the two largest American comic book publishers that we have. Marvel and DC are also not paying people on time right now. And I don't blame him for being fearful that this could get him in hot water. It doesn't matter that he's right. It doesn't matter that he's telling the truth. And it doesn't matter that they're the ones actually screwing him out of the money that they owe him. This industry is so disgusting. They will absolutely blacklist you for anything if they feel like you've gotten out of line. You go out there and point out an issue within the industry, there's a good chance no one will ever work with you again. Isn't it insane that crowdfunding comics on Indiegogo feels like a more stable business venture than working for the two biggest publishers in North America right now? I can tell you right now, Will Robson would have more job security and would get paid on time if he worked for a guy that makes YouTube videos on his phone in Texas right now. Zach, while you might not like him and you might not agree with all the things that he says, he actually pays all his creators on time. In fact, if you talk to him and you work it out with him, he will pay you early. Think about that. A dude that makes YouTube videos on his phone, but also makes comic books, obviously, for Indiegogo and stuff, has a better reputation for paying comic book creators on time right now than Marvel and DC Comics. Tell me that the industry is just raining money right now. Tell me how healthy this comic book industry is. There's never been a better time to be a comic book creator than right here, right now, as everybody is getting screwed over out of their money. Will Robson continues. But recently, I've had what I thought was a stroke of bad luck with getting paid on that agreed amount of time after finishing work. And I'm not talking a week late. I'm talking 5 to 10 weeks late. These delays have caused me and my family so much stress, it's unbelievable. I've dealt with delayed payments in the past working with smaller companies, but the biggest companies in the business are now delaying payments regularly, and I've really had enough. A project I worked on recently hasn't paid me. I was expecting payment for it in mid-November. How do these companies expect me to pay my bills and afford the holidays? Why at this moment in time are they so late on making their payments? We have heard in the past that Marvel was late previously, stating that when they were acquired by Disney, a lot of things fell through the cracks and they weren't meeting some of their payments, but supposedly they'd fixed all these problems. The parent companies for Marvel and DC actually have money. Certainly they have an enormous amount of debt and they are losing money, but they do have cash reserves. But apparently they've decided 'tis the season to start screwing over creators left and right. I wonder why nobody wants to work for Marvel and DC anymore, other than, I don't know, Riley Rossmo and Tini Howard. It's because it's not the best gig in town anymore. It's not even all that dependable or reliable anymore. Absolutely ridiculous what is going on with comic books, that they're fucking so many families over right here during the holidays. He continues, I've been constantly living in a state of survival mode all year with barely affording to get by due to these delays. I just find it ridiculous that I'm a trained and skilled worker who works 10 to 15 hour shifts 5 to 7 days a week to hit these ridiculous industry standard deadlines that already take you away from having any sense of a normal family social life to then have to worry about paying your bills or feeding your family. I mean, I get to draw these iconic characters owned by these large companies who are making millions off adapting freelancers like myself's art and creativity. But when you're drawing these characters internally stressing over whether or not you can afford to buy your family Christmas presents this year due to payment delays, then enough is enough. I work hard, I hit my deadlines, pay me. And not surprisingly, Will Robson is not an isolated incident within comic books. This is what Joe Quinones had to say. Waited recently over a full year on one publisher before getting paid and currently still waiting payment. Running on 6 months now from a second prominent publisher who has largely ghosted me relating to 2 separate covers I crafted for them last summer. Know of another artist who's drawn several full issues and covers for a miniseries they're working on without one paycheck. Yet their publisher will come knocking for the next cover, the next issue, then threaten to move on to another artist if not replied back with expedience. When Joe Quinones is reaching out and saying, hey, you're a year late on the payment on this, you're 6 months late on the payment on this, nobody wants to speak to him. And this is not an isolated incident for the publishers just ghosting people. It's not just because they don't want to pay you. They just might not want to talk to you anymore. Obviously, I talked about it yesterday when I talked about the Jeremy Adams situation over at DC Comics. Joe Quinones continues. The first publisher I won't name because I believe it was an honest mistake. The second publisher is Valiant. Bloodshot and Archer and Armstrong covers I did just over 6 months ago. No payment, largely no correspondence except to kick the can down the road. We're working on this. We know that Valiant Comics is in a lot of trouble right now. I imagine we're never going to see this X-O Man-O-War series illustrated by Liam Sharp. He's probably done a good portion of the artwork right now. Liam Sharp is an in-demand artist. Liam Sharp is one of the best artists in the entire industry. I hope that they paid him up front, or at least gave him a down payment for the work that he's going to put in that will likely never get published because Valiant Comics is in such dire financial straits right now. There's no way Valiant Comics makes it out of 2023 alive. I just don't see how it can happen at this point because he's not the only one talking about Valiant Comics not paying them. I don't know that we're going to have a Marvel and DC Comics in 2 or 3 years. I know we certainly won't have a lot of these small publishers in 2 or 3 years. And American comic book fans that aren't ready to transition over to manga are going to have to look more and more to like Kickstarter, Indiegogo, crowdfunded creators doing their own thing. That way they can get reliable comic books because I think a lot of these things are going to start shutting down. This industry has absolutely screwed itself at this point. And all those comic pros that have been sitting out there talking down to EBS and your boy Zach, instead of learning from what they were doing and realizing that they weren't completely full of crap, that the comic book industry really was in bad shape, and they knew better than us because they knew they weren't getting paid. Instead of just going out there and talking trash on all these people, they should have been figuring out, how does this crowdfunding thing work? How do I go out there and find my own audience? That way I don't have to work for Marvel, DC, Image, or any of these other companies. They're going to go out there and stiff me out of the money that they owe me when the rent is due and it's Christmas of 2022. We've been talking about this. We've been putting up the warning sign for like 3 or 4 or 5 years right now that there's something wrong with comic books, and they all buried their heads in the sand. And now that the bill is due, they don't know what they're going to do. It's not just Joe Quinones. It's not just Will Robson. This is what Eon Marin had to say. Publishers dragging their feet on payments is a systemic problem in comics, and I'm fucking sick of it. I've had to take on seasonal work in retail because of the financial lurch a book's payment issues has left me in just before Christmas, too. Of all the times to do it, we have a comic book pro that wants to be part of the industry that is doing everything he can to put out the best comic books possible, and he's having to go out there and work at JCPenney for the holidays because that is a more reliable paycheck than the 2 biggest American comic book publishers in the entire country. Absolutely ridiculous. You just can't count on these publishers to actually pay you right now because the industry is in shambles. They aren't making money hand over fist. It's not raining money in the comic book industry. It might be raining money in Barnes and Noble. It might be raining money on Amazon, and it might be raining money in Walmart, where comic books produced in Japan or produced for very small children are actually in high demand. Unfortunately, that's not trickling down to the comic book creators in North America for the most part, and it's certainly not trickling down for the most part to local comic shops in North America, the people that need this the most. It's absolutely disgusting what these people have done to the comic book industry. And while I do feel very empathetic and I feel terrible for these creators that this has happened to them, a lot of them bear a lot of the responsibility for this because they buried their heads in the sand too. They knew something was wrong. They could have went out there and said, you know what? You might not like the way your boy Zach said this, but he's actually fucking right. I actually have proof that this is what's going on in comic books. Instead, they ostracized an entire generation of comic book fans, told them to hit the bricks, and then they bankrupted themselves, not just metaphorically, but actually financially as well. This is what Declan Shalvey had to say. This is a long time coming. Some publishers really screwing creators over this year by paying them months late, if at all. Too many good people are holding on to goodwill. Meanwhile, bills are stacking up, results in a lot of great books getting cut off at the knees. The only thing that stopped me from speaking up is that it would affect friends who had their first big opportunities at these publishers. But they're even more vulnerable to this behavior at this stage. There's nothing to lose. That's right. Your dirty little secret is going to be aired out for everybody. You've screwed over too many people too many times. They all talk behind the scenes. I've known this was happening for absolutely months. Now we're getting bigger comic book creators willing to come out and say, you know what? Things are messed up. There's no money right now in comic books because they destroyed the industry. Declan Shalvey was not complete. I've said this before. The smaller publishers who are taking the piss with payments are a hair's breadth away from being ruined. All you need is one creator to let slip and name names, and the justifiable pitchforks will be out. For the sake of your company, pay your creators. Absolutely. For the sake of your reputation, and the reputation not only with creators, but with your customers, you need to make your payments on time. And what he's quote tweeting there, you cannot see. That is actually from Zach Thompson, who had a very interesting tweet that he ended up deleting afterwards. I wonder why he deleted it. Could it be reprisals for actually going out there and speaking the truth about the comic book industry? These idiots all decided to turn a blind eye because they needed to own the chuds, right? We can't go out there and let everyone know that your boy Zach was right all along. We can't go out there and let everyone know that Thinking Critical is pretty much right on the money when talking about the state of the comic book industry and how bad it is right here, right now for the creators and obviously for the customers and the local comic shops. Obviously, comic books will still be made. People will find a way to get comic books to customers that want them. People don't want the bad comic books that are flooding the market these days. First of all, there's too many publishers, there's too many new comic books out there, and there are too many activists in comic books destroying characters and universes right now. Way too many people with agendas other than making the best stories with the best heroes in the world. It feels like a collapse is imminent. I don't know that we're going to see a full collapse, but certainly we are going to see a lot of people not make it out of 2023. We're going to see a lot of comic book creators not stick around for another missed payment around the holidays from one of these publishers. Smart creators like a Joe Mad saw this coming years ago. And they said, you know what? I could be one of the greatest comic book artists in the history of the industry, up there with Jim Lee. I could be up there with Carmine Infantino and all of those guys. I could be up there with maybe a Jack Kirby or something like that, but I will never be able to pay the bills trying to be a full-time comic book artist. Certainly he loves the industry. He had to go away to video games. Eric Canetti is a fantastic comic book artist, mentored by Jim Lee himself. Could have been the future of the industry. Could have been one of the greatest Batman artists of all time. Could have been one of the greatest Spider-Man artists of all time. But he realized passion for the industry does not pay the bills, and he had to go to video games as well. Sure, he still does comic books because he loves comic books. He does them on the side, a little side hustle. But he needs to pay the bills because he's realistic, and he realized the comic book industry just wasn't going to cut it in the long haul. I think a lot of people are coming to this conclusion. I imagine a lot of you are wondering, well, some of these people are very talented. They could probably get jobs elsewhere. Why do they even stick around for all this stuff? Well, it's the same reason you and I stick around. It's passion for the industry. It's hope that tomorrow is going to bring a brighter day. The comic book industry can't keep tanking the way it is, right? It can't hit rock bottom every single year concurrently. Eventually, it has to get better, right? And then you imagine the payments will get better. Maybe people will get paid on time. Maybe they won't have to illustrate superheroes having lunch all the time and just speaking. Maybe they'll be able to do action and stuff like that. There's a reason I'm still here in comic books. There's a reason I still read comic books every single day. There's a reason I still have this channel. It's not because I hate comics. It's because I love comic books. I have a passion for this industry, for this storytelling medium. I have a passion for these heroes and these universes. And I still do hope, despite reality slapping me in the face on a daily basis, that things can be turned around. I talked about it. why I'm still reading comics. It's the same reason a lot of you are still reading comics. And it's the same reason a lot of you who aren't reading comics still pay attention, because you do have hope that eventually things will get better. If you can't see it here, there's also a link in the video description.